In Chris Benoit's diary, the musings on death, the paranoia about his son being kidnapped, his nightmares and constant fatigue were all depressive symptoms Dr. Bales had found in many others. But Bales and Amalu took the study of concussions further than anyone ever had, searching for physical evidence in the brains of dead athletes who'd suffered head injuries. Not wrestlers, but football players.
If you read their life story, you'll see a very common thread of failure in their personal life, failure in their business life, depression, suicide attempts, and then suicide completion. So they had a very common thread.
The catalyst was the case of legendary Pittsburgh Steeler Mike Webster, winner of 4 Super Bowls, then a coach with the Kansas City Chiefs. Towards the end of his career, Webster couldn't remember where he lived and often slept in the Chiefs' locker room. He wound up living in his truck, frequently zapping himself with a taser to try to stop his constant pain. Mike Webster was only 50 when he died of a heart attack. And the toll of other football fatalities the doctors found echoed the litany of dead wrestlers. Among them, former Steeler Terry Long, Pittsburgh lineman Justin Strelzik, former Philadelphia Eagle Andre Waters. Though none had a history of depression, all committed suicide in the past few years after sustaining head injuries. Analysis of their brain tissue revealed the presence of a protein, usually seen in the brains of elderly people with dementia, but almost never in normal middle-aged men. Doctors say the probability of that abnormal brain protein being found in someone in their 30s or 40s is about 1 in 100. But the researchers found it in every football player they studied who'd suffered concussions of the brain and then committed suicide. It was a groundbreaking discovery, and subsequent peer review of the work done by Drs. Bales and Amalu has been overwhelmingly positive. The conclusion: football players are at great risk of profound behavioral changes caused by head injuries. Now, Chris Benoit's suicide opened the door to include wrestlers. It was ex-wrestler Chris Nowinski who convinced the families of many deceased football players to grant permission for the doctors to study their brains. It's why he called Mike Benoit just days after the death of his son Chris. Mike said he'd get back to him. The next day he did.
And I said, yes, I've decided, and that's when it started.
Chris Benoit's brain was driven from Atlanta to the University of Pittsburgh and delivered to Dr. Bennett Amalu, who was amazed by what he saw.
Chris Benoit's brain looked like the brain of an individual suffering from a specific type of dementia. And this type of dementia you see in people in their 80s and 90s, which was extremely unusual.
That finding was consistent with each of the other athletes they'd studied. But what's more remarkable, and what's now being submitted for peer review before publication in a major medical journal, is that the damage they found in Chris Benoit's brain was so extensive that the doctors believe he cannot be held responsible for the terrible deaths of his wife and son.
We think maybe that brain was, in a behavioral sense, diaphragm and disconnected, no longer able to cope with the normal life's events and stressors. We don't think it was roid or steroid rage. We think that's a different syndrome than that.
Every finding has been confirmed by other neuropathologists. I don't know of one neuropathologist that's ever come forward and said this isn't true.
But that didn't stop World Wrestling boss Vince McMahon from going on CNN and rejecting the new research.
The findings themselves stated Chris Benoit had the brain of an 85-year-old man with dementia. And I would suggest to you that from a layman's standpoint, Chris Benoit could not do what he did for a living. He could not function as a normal human being. He couldn't even go to the airport if, in fact, that report were accurate.
For now, the only specific response to all of this from Vince McMahon and World Wrestling has been to ban hitting an opponent in the head with a chair. We wanted to ask about the alarming death rate among wrestlers and the issues raised by the new head injury research, but the WWE refused our request to talk to Mr. McMahon. But the fundamental question raised by the research is potentially huge for wrestling. What exactly does a vast revenue center like the WWE owe its gladiators, who bring in the fans, the ratings, and the money? and who, if the science and statistics are correct as they appear, are systematically sustaining severe physical and mental damage to do it. Even those who survive carry scars from life in the ring. Brett, the hitman Hart, retired in 2000. Shortly afterwards, he suffered a stroke. Doctors say multiple concussions are a probable cause.
The concussion was like saying you sprain your thumb, you know, like tape it up and just get out there, you know, and that'll be okay. They don't take into account the fact that just a body slam or any kind of move when you got a concussion is another concussion.
Back in Britain, the man Chris Benoit emulated his entire career has so far survived too, though these days the Dynamite Kid is confined to a wheelchair in near constant pain. He admitted to CNN that he once put a shotgun under his wife's chin and threatened to pull the trigger, though he now insists it didn't constitute violence.
I don't think it was violent. I mean, I put a shotgun under her chin once. I had no shells. I only pretended that.
His ex-wife Michelle says life with him got so bad, she not only contemplated suicide, but taking her children with her.
I went to get one of Tom's guns, but I kept thinking, what if one of us lives? Because number one, I didn't want anyone to live with him anymore.
So we kind of, I'm actually losing my train of thought here.
And former wrestler Chris Nowinski, whose own concussions were the key that unlocked Chris Benoit's secret, still finds himself losing ground.
I thought I was getting over the 4.5 years of headaches, and now they're getting worse again, and it's really, I can't work a full week anymore. I'm losing entire days, and it's not good.
I can't change what happened. I cannot change it. Can't bring my son back, can't bring my daughter-in-law back, can't bring my grandson back. But I can make changes going forward.
As for Chris Benoit's father, Mike, he knows whatever the doctors say happened to his son, there will always be many others just like him, willing to do whatever it takes in a wrestling business too profitable to stop them, unless forced to do it.
The wrestling industry will change, and they'll change dramatically because of what happened to Chris Benoit. And why will they change? Because it's going to make good business sense to change. They will not be able to afford the litigation that's going to take place over this. Period. End of story.